Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Parse. This is episode 4 now. We're talking today about static construction and talent evaluation. Typically, this podcast has gone into the more in-depth playstyles of specific roles or specific jobs within Final Fantasy XIV, but today we're looking a little bit more big picture, and not necessarily about how you should be pushing buttons, but how you should be more outside the box, thinking about making your team, what you should be looking for in players. Particularly focusing on the high-end performance, right? We're talking world progression, speed killing. So I'll let Jung introduce our guests and hosts today.
So today we're joined by Oryza Mercury, who I'm a huge fan of. The last time I was in his stream about a month ago, I got banned off of Twitch, which was super great. I would think of him as a world progress, does a lot for the community. Most recently, he's becoming the first FF14 TikToker, from what I hear. So there's some really great video editing stuff happening there. Especially recently, though, he's been pushing a lot of the sort of world second, third, fourth in a lot of the Eden raids. Proficient healer, really great Astro, has played range DPS at a really high level. Likes to tell people, don't care about your logs, but has great logs. A bunch of ironies going on, but this is Oryza. And then on my far left is Sfia, who is a color commentator now for Limit, from what I hear, and Complexity. He specializes in commentating World of Warcraft raids every single night at super degenerate hours. Doesn't really give us any real content, and when he does stream by himself, he mostly just runs around the wards. And that's Sfia.
How are you?
You want me to introduce myself?
Yeah, you have to. This is how it works.
What's up, babes? Good job.
Part-time male model, part-time ex-semi-professional League of Legends player. Now is a, he's had tweets liked by Double F, so he's kind of a big deal in the PoE community. He's sort of a new blood to the Final Fantasy XIV top end community, but he's making waves with his insane Dragoon optimizations.
Oh yeah.
So we'll dive right into it. Actually, I think, and so because we're talking about static construction today and talent evaluation, I think the most important thing that we start off with is kind of establishing what makes a good team to begin with, so then we can look at the parts that make that up. Do you have like an overview statement or any specific things that go into the larger picture of a team as a whole that you think is important?
Man, there's so much stuff. I don't know if I can sum it up easily. But I do think that
as deep as you like.
I can't come up with every skill for a team off the top of my head because there's just a lot of different areas that players can be good at. But I do think with teams, it's the skills I think of for a team, especially in world progression and stuff like that, is what is your team's, well, okay, everyone talks about DPS, right? So it's what is the balance of how much damage your group can push, because not everyone in the group is going to be at the same level in terms of optimization. So it's who's better at it, and overall how much damage does your team do. I think about how many people do you have. My camera's freaking out, but it's how many people do you have that can solve mechanics, right? And typically I would say you don't want too many voices, but it's what's the balance of that? There's then strategy comes after that, and also communicating strategy to each other. How well the 8 team members can just communicate to each other and divide up responsibility, and I don't know, there's just so much stuff. At the very base level, it's
brushed on a little bit there at the end is the clashing typically is a result of what I think is one of the most important things when it comes to actually forming a team, and not specifically the individuals in it, which you need that shared vision, shared goals, and that sort of issue there is what will cause those sort of clashes. It's all about expectations. It's all about what the goal is at the end. And if you don't have those sort of matched and met, a team can just straight up fall apart or be incredibly dysfunctional because of it. Those sorts of things are typically established by the core, whoever starts the group together, where you've got, one person putting a team together to make a world progression group, one person starting, with a couple of his friends to make a casual group, one person starting with a few other people he knows to make a speedrunning group. And making sure that you are getting people who fit that goal and fit that, what you're looking for there, the vision, is really, really important. But it's really hard to convey a lot of those things a lot of the time, especially if people have never been in that situation before. A first-time progger won't exactly know all of the stuff that goes into world progress. So trying to teach them all that in a recruitment format can be pretty miserable.
I know of a group in particular that there was this one guy who was trying to do world prog for the first time during Promise, like full world prog, and he was a really good. Like if I say his name, everyone will know who he is. But basically, he took a team of 7 really high parsers. Like all they did was parse, and they had a shared vision of like, yeah, we want to be like a world prog group, and we're gonna clear week 1. We're gonna go for as early as week 1 as possible, and then they were like clocking, I think, 16 hours a day week 1, something like that. And at the end of week 1, they were, I think, progging the end of E11. So even with the shared vision, even with that, I still think like in terms of this, I don't know. I do appreciate the need for soft skills and stuff, but I don't really understand how that happened. I guess because I think that people say we have a shared vision of this, but they don't realize the inputs that go into this. So they can say like, yeah, I want to be part of the team and I want to grind and I want to, really contribute to the environment in a meaningful way. But then they don't do the prep beforehand. They don't. I guess what I'm trying to say is, or trying to ask is, how do you evaluate if people are being honest and earnest when they say, and specifically in the context of world prog, like, yes, I have the shared version of world prog as well. Just the vision, just the motivation side.
Well, it's like those people are probably all being like earnest. They just don't understand what it takes, right? Like they think that maybe that they're complacent because they think that they're good enough to, viably compete in world progression without any experience, right? I think like the best you can get from a recruitment perspective is like one, like if you recruit experienced people who have done, world progression or at least like week 1 hardcore progression in the past, like they have a better understanding of what you're looking for. Otherwise, it's like you just gotta talk with them a lot and describe it as best as you can. I feel like when I was recruiting people for my current group, I was like, I tried to be like as specific as possible in terms of like the goals we wanted to achieve, and I didn't have to talk about the work to reach those goals because everyone in my group pretty much has done hardcore before. But I think if they hadn't, I would be like, this would involve doing like this many hours of preparation like per week, and we'll start doing preparation like this many weeks before progression starts, and like stuff like that.
Yeah. So I think something that you touched on a little bit when you were talking before, but we didn't kind of dive into, was within the group you need a certain just a base requirement of how much damage you can do, how many strategists you have, how functional they are. And when we refer back to the E11 week 1 group, that's the sort of thing where those hard skills are probably the gate. Like you can all be aiming for something but not have those hard skills required to actually be a competitor. And then if we look at those hard skills, DPS is a little less sort of murky, but recruiting strategists is not an easy feat. You can have people who know the game inside and out and they don't know shit about how to actually make a functional strat or how to break down a mechanic and all those sorts of things. So moving on from what makes the good team, because I feel like we've gone over everything we need to there. We know that it's about having these hard skills. We know it's about the shared vision, the shared goals. Now, when we're recruiting a player, how do we determine that they have these things that our group needs? Right, so they need the damage, they need the skill set. The strategy. They need the soft skills. They need to work well in a team, and there are so many little aspects of this that go into it. Like it is you could write a list forever.
Can we start with the most obvious one, which is damage? Can we just start there and let's just knock that one out? And I think that if you repeatedly raid to some degree of repetition, not like getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of blocks, but maybe like let's say you get 50 kills on that's I think reasonable over a tier, right? Like let's say you're a raider, but you don't like love parsing or anything. If you don't at least break into like the like 90 to 100, like in the 90s basically, to me that pretty much signals not that you're like, it's not that if you do these things you're a great player, it's that if you can't do that within the average landscape, right, because it's recorded against so many people, then you probably aren't suited to do week 1 prog, period.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really good point there. Like when you say, I already forgot your phrasing, but you basically said that like 90 to 100 parses aren't like good enough by themselves, but not having them is like a red flag, right? I think as we talk about, like, I guess logs in particular is very much like you can only see red flags and you'll never be able to be sure that someone's good from vlogs, but you'll definitely be sure that like someone's not sufficient in certain ways. And I think it's funny, like we're talking about damage first because like traditionally you would think it's like the easiest to understand and like it's like the one thing you can definitively look at because we have logs. But I actually think damage is also surprisingly hard to understand because some people just can't do damage in prog specifically. Like they take too long to be able to figure out how to optimize their rotation for the fight's timeline or like the specific mechanics or downtime they have to get, or like as a healer, like to optimize your healing. And then like sure, by like week 3 or 4, they'll figure it out. But it's like, can you do that during progression without either dying yourself or letting other people die? And that's like, you can't see that through logs. So yeah.
We all know those people who week 4, week 5, when they've been gear fed, they go and blast everything, right? And that's a skill. But in progression, that skill isn't tested at all. You're not using, known timelines, all that sort of stuff. You're taking it, and it's about getting to that point of damage that is required as soon as possible. So testing for that, finding someone who can do that, how do you actively and accurately do that?
I think
you don't.
One good way to do it is like fights that people don't like, have done once but didn't care about, that were really easy to clear. So like if you haven't farmed Diamond Weapon as a totem out, that is a really cool fight, I think, in terms of, because I never bothered trying to figure out the timeline for it. There's so many break phases and there's so many downtimes and so on and so on. Looking at how someone can go like 3 or 4 pulls in and change the rotation and try to optimize their DPS through might be one good way to evaluate, right? But I don't think you can do it in current Savage anymore. There's too many dummy fights. And like even the non-dummy fight for this tier 11 was like, it's based around being really, really forgiving, right? Because it has a 230 break, which means that you can get you can like delay your 1 minute timers, you can delay your openers and still fit everything into it. You might lose out 1 or 2 things on the optimization side, but like, yeah, I don't know. I think that's like, you look at these really awkward weird fights, and I think might be running those because you don't optimize those, right?
I can give you an example of what we did actually this expansion. Before every tier, we went and got rank 1 on every single extreme primal. Because they will have very varied push timers. They'll have like phases which just happen at awkward times, and they'll have a ton of them, like all of them. They'll have just periods of invulnerability. They'll have things like, oh, you can't hit the boss from the flanks at this point, which is a pain in the ass, and it's RNG whether it happens. So you have a whole lot of stuff that you never really encounter in Savage, and you have to actively be thinking every single time you do one of these primals, because there's a lot of them, right? At this point we have close to 10, I think, and every single time you have to go back and re-establish the best way to deal damage in these fights. So that's one of the ways that we try to combat this, but it's not used as a recruitment tool, right? This is used as a, we already have our people, this is what we can do. So now how do you then translate that sort of environment to we're trialing, we've got 16 people who want to join this one spot. We're not going to go and do this with all of them. That's miserable. So how do you then consolidate all of that trial process into a very small amount of time that you want to give this person?
I really feel like you just kind of don't. I mean, like you try your best, but I don't know of like a good answer for this, and like this will be the same when we like move on to talk about like how do you test solving skill, how do you test like consistency, how do you test like how fast you can win strategies. It's like there's ways that you can like try to simulate progression basically, but it's never super accurate. It's like you're able to test like these skills that are like somewhat correlated to like actual progression skill, but it's not the same. So in terms of damage, it's like, oh, if this person, it's like so person dependent. Like sometimes you get lucky and this person has just like not done Eden's verse or something because they weren't here. So you can just like go mid-eye level that and like see how they do. It's like, but when you have people who have like done every fight in the game, you know, they're like a boomer, they've been playing since 2.0. It's like I struggle a lot actually on like recruitment and like figuring out how to simulate progression for those players. But because they've been playing so long, I tend to try to. That's when you kind of turn to references if possible.
So on that simulation side, we've talked about this. I know this is probably jumping forward, but what do you think about hell mode or Oryza?
Oh, the face temperance event.
Yeah, like just for people who don't know, it's like simulating like doing a fight, but then putting a bunch of really ridiculous restrictions on you during that fight. So the most recent one, E8S, but you could only use like a quarter of the arena or something like that.
The
I mean, you
sections
got
of it, yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I missed a lot of the recent ones because I had like they kept getting scheduled when I had like other things planned already.
Mm-hmm.
But I did the first one, I think, and that was Shadowkeeper. And we actually did that while trialing someone and like just like trying to play together as a like somewhat newly formed group for the first time. And it felt like well, if you're asking on the I think like if we're just talking about skills overall and like how well it simulates progression, I felt like it was pretty decent for like how fast a person can learn a new strategy and consistently execute it. And it's like not perfect because players are already familiar with these fights, they know like some of the very small nuances that can make executing specific strategies easier. Like specific snapshot timings is a really good one that like you have to figure out snapshot timings in prog for like the unclear mechanics. I think the other problem with hell mode is that like some of the conditions, at least in my opinion, were just like frustrating to deal with and like not super fun. In particular, the ones that are like take damage from this but also take 0 damage, and you just have to like stack a bunch of mitigation on, and it's like just testing a mitigation plan. Like I personally felt like there was almost no value from a recruitment perspective for those, but also we weren't recruiting healers, so you know, maybe there is. But like I guess the way that ties into recruitment is that like when we're doing this trial or we're doing the hell mode, it's kind of like it's not as fun, I guess. And like at the end of the day, when you're trying people, part of it is like you have to make it at least somewhat enjoyable, because if you're trying a lot of people, it gets tiring really fast if you're doing like really boring stuff, like just the same savage tier over and over again.
Yeah. The hell mode things I think they're both good and bad, right? Because like you said, particularly the bad side of it that we interpret is you already know all the mechanics. All you're doing is doing the same thing in a slightly different way with a couple more restrictions. So that doesn't it's all about the simulation, right? You're trying to simulate a blind prog experience where you're learning everything all at once. And maybe you can relate some of those things back to old mechanics, but they won't be exactly the same in the way that they're presented and the way that they function within the whole fight itself. So getting that simulation experience from that is literally impossible. That has a little bit, I think, of kind of interaction with the way that we approach ultimate progression, because ultimate progression is taking a bazillion different known mechanics. Some of them will be changed to be, new in function. But I think the hell modes are probably more suited to the way that ultimate preparation and progression works. So those sorts of fights are pretty good for recruiting a person for an ultimate, I think, if you were to go and do that sort of thing. But it's also good because, like you said, it teaches people, it gives you an understanding of how good people are at learning a new strat, how consistent they are at executing under pressure, and pressure is, time restriction, and also how good they are at formulating strats with restrictions, which is something that is insanely difficult to test in any other situation. Like, I've considered making people play things like Bubba as you on stream for me and be like, can you solve this? Can you figure this stuff out? But there's no correlation between any sort of problem solving in game and out of game, so you can't do this stuff. You can't test it. It's incredibly frustrating.
If this was a 2005 movie, though, the way that you would test that is you would play like a chess match for 3 days, but it would be recorded over 1 hour, 1 minute and 30-second period, and be really dramatic, and maybe you get something out of that, right?
I hate what you're doing right now.
I'm on board with making everyone play Papa as you. That game is really good. And
it is.
I was like, if you guys want to get better at like solving stuff, dude, this game makes you think.
Wait, you're actually serious?
I mean,
it's unironically what I do out of Final Fantasy progression time. I just do as much just general brain training shit as I can, and just make myself think of problems in different ways. So I'll do 3D puzzle games, I'll do problem solving games like that. It's good fun. Like, they're really fun, and I enjoy the challenge as well. But there is like a little bit of, transferable skill there, and it just your ability to critically think.
Yeah. I mean, I really like puzzle games, so it's just a game that I really like. But I think that those brain puzzle stuff is really good in terms of solving specifically, and because, I mean, 14 mechanics are basically it's basically like a puzzle game. That's how I view it. I think that like the thing is, like, I guess when it comes to recruitment, obviously the more someone's able to solve, like, the better in general. But I do think there comes a point where it's like this, we're filling our 8 slot. We already have a few people who are really good at solving. Like, it's a nice skill to have, but it's not nearly as important as like other skills that this group might like be slightly lacking in. So I guess it's not like related to the puzzle game thing, but like sometimes it's just like a thing that you don't really have to think about testing. Like, there's like universal skills, which are like everybody has to be able to learn mechanics. Everybody has to be able to like do at least some semblance of damage. Like, everybody has to learn strategies. And then there's like skills that like probably only a few people need. Like, someone in the group needs to be good at like keeping the group's morale up. Someone in the group needs to be good at like shot calling. Like, obviously you can have multiple people good at these things, but like you need at least like 1 or 2. You need a few people in the group who can like solve mechanics. You need a few people who can come up with strategy and stuff like that. So solving mechanics is like one of those skills that's like not needed to be universal.
I completely disagree there.
Really?
I think that mechanic solving needs to be literally everyone in the group. The way that progression works in Final Fantasy is so mechanic and strategy driven that as soon as you get to a point where you don't have an immediate answer, you've thrown, right? You need to always have something to work on. And if you have 2-3 people who are typically your strategists that you go to, and nobody else even ever interacts with the formulation of strategy, and those 2 or 3 people get stuck, then you've just lost the tier. Unless people throw at the end and then you can steal strats and then surpass them. But essentially, because of the nature of Final Fantasy progression, right? It's not about, of course it is about execution. Execution is super important, and we all know that. But you can't execute a strat that you haven't figured out. You can keep getting to that point and just walling it over and over again to the point to try and get more information on a mechanic that you've already have all the information for. But having 8 strategists is, I think, one of the most valuable things you can do with your team. Everybody should be contributing to strategy. Not everyone needs to contribute to the same strategy, but typically every single time you come up to something new, you want someone to be able to immediately say, yes, this is how we do this. Because people think differently, right? Nobody is ever going to look at the same problem and go through the exact same thought process to get there, to the solution. So having as much variation in the way that you think about these problems, and having as much sort of just different approaches, and people who can then sort of fact check other people who can accurately and really quickly break down what is good and bad about mechanics as well. All of these things all go together, and getting that combination of people is really fucking difficult, because all of these things aren't things that you get to know from just a trial. This is things that you get to know over months or years of playing with people. So then going back to the topic of how do we recruit this, the answer is you just literally do not. What you do is you know how individuals play. And that's why word of mouth is so fucking important. Because a good example that I can talk about is Sindel thinks the complete opposite to me. But I will really enjoy playing with Sindel because of the fact that he thinks the complete opposite to me. I can bring something up and he can say, what about in this situation that I don't consider? And vice versa.
I think the big thing is that you guys both know when to say it. Like, both know when to stop and like accept it as this is good enough. And like knowing the good enough point, especially in world prog, is really big. I think a lot of people who aren't as used to like progging early are like, no, but this strategy is better. It's like we're wasting 5 extra minutes, 10 extra minutes, 20 extra minutes changing the strategy for what? Uptime? on a fight that we're gonna clear by like 30-40% on DPS check. I think having that maturity to move on and and to know what the objective is when you're creating a strategy and kind of bouncing strategy off each other. I think that's pretty big and perhaps not thought about often, because you can have a bunch of like really good minds, but okay, that's not true either. You can maybe get like 2 or 3 smart people total. Let's I don't know. How do you even recruit for 8 different? I don't know. It just seems like an impossible path basically to recruit for that. I kind of agree with Ori here that if you have like 1, 2, 3, 4 people who are like more aligned with strategy, that's a more realistic set for making a week 1 group.
I think my point is that like the more strategists you have, like you get diminishing returns on each one, I feel. Whereas like something like mechanical consistency, it's like you kind of need everyone to do it. And if like one person is not mechanically consistent, they're just going to drag you down the whole time. Especially for like the harder fights where one person messing up can just wipe you. Of course, like more is always better. Like you always like want more people who can do more damage. You want more people who can like solve mechanics and just like yeah, but
Can we talk about the cheerleader thing a bit?
Oh, the morale thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think morale and momentum are like really huge in progression. And I think it's somewhat inevitable. At least like I think that like you can try to get rid of this as much as possible, but like people are going to make mistakes, right? No one will play perfect throughout all of progression. And then like some people, when other people make mistakes, will get really mad and they'll let you know that they're really mad, and that absolutely kills morale. And then other people are able to like shake it off, and like some people get mad at themselves, like they're just like they start to tilt because they mess up, and then one of their teammates are able to like cool them down, untilt them, and then you can just keep progressing as normal. I think like if morale is low, you know, people are mad at each other or at themselves. They just play worse. They're in their own head. They're not focusing on the game. They're like focusing on like, oh, I can't believe I made that mistake, or like, damn, that other person is like really messing up a lot, and then that causes them to make mistakes, and it becomes like this negative feedback loop, and just it gets really bad. So people who are able to like stop that from happening, I think, are really valuable.
So, do you think a League of Legends player is better suited to deal with tilt or worse suited to deal with tilt?
Have you been banned from League before?
No.
I
haven't been banned from anything before, except from Twitch. But I guess okay, the real question I'm asking basically is, I think addressing tilt's complicated, right? Because we think a lot about, like, I think keeping a positive environment is one thing, and I think a lot of people, when they think about, so I come from like a really old centric sports background, right? Which is like you're really hard on yourself and you're always there for your teammates, but it's not like it's okay. It's like, yeah, well, let's move on, let's go to the next one. And it's just it's sort of even keel that way, but you're really hard on yourself, right? So I feel like one of the ways in which I'm able to focus better is when I am hard on myself. I start to kind of stress out a lot, right? I feel like a little bit of sweat, a little bit of gamer sweat, some Dorito dust on my, yeah, it feels good. I start like gaming properly, right? And I kind of worry about, because it seems to me what you're saying by cheerleader, maybe it's not cheerleader, right? You need someone who has like their pulse on the sort of mental state of the whole group and knows how to keep it balanced. Or you need multiple people doing that, I think. And I think that might make more sense than having like someone who's just PMA.
I think like, I guess what you're talking about is like complacency. And I think that, I guess like my perspective is skewed, right? Because like the people who I play with and like the goals we're trying to achieve, it's like the people I play with want to clear as fast as we can. So like everyone is already hard on themselves. Like no one is complacent. So like if people are being, if people are like trying to keep the morale up, it's almost always like going to be a positive effect of untilting you, and it's never like allowing you to just be okay with mediocrity, because like everyone is not okay with that in themselves already. So it's like just not a thing we think about.
A lot of that comes down to just individual maturity as well, right? Like when it comes to tilt, 99% of that sort of stuff is entirely on the individual. Now, there are things that can be assisted by other people being around, and you want to put those fail safes in place. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of individual accountability and responsibility for these things. So the cheerleader function is there to help other people solve their own shit, as opposed to them being the dude who is like the be-all and end-all of static morale, right? That's
true.
That's kind of misplacing responsibility there.
So before we loop back into these, I want to ask a really poignant question, which is a really specific question, but a really big one. So let's pretend I don't have a lot of world prog experience. Okay, let's just pretend that I'm not on TPS. Okay,
This is a really tough one to think of.
And I want to get into the world prog scene. What are the, if you could each make like a short list of things that you're looking at? I guess we'll start with Ori first and see you can like cover if you think he's missing anything. But a short list of things I need to do as someone who wants to be recruited. What should I be looking at? Like,
get lucky. Like, no. So actually, though, I have recruited. I guess I'm probably not the right person to ask because my recruitment process has literally been like, this is just like a static I had for a while, and then when I was creating a new group, it was just like, oh, I like trusted, I like was playing with a friend, and then she just like knew a bunch of people, and then we just like took those people, and then we like swap one out or something with other people they knew. So I guess like what you should do is get to know people and like start networking and stuff. But that's, how do you do that? It's like, I'm not really sure. You can like try to figure out a way to like sub for like groups that those people are playing in, but like it's not something you can just go easily do, right? Like you can just throw yourself into Party Finder and like hope that someone notices you. That's probably not going to happen. So like, I mean, obviously the things you can control are like making sure that you're skilled enough that a real progression team would notice you in the first place, right? And then I also think that like you might have to just work incrementally. It's like your goal might be world progression, but maybe this tier you should just think about like doing week 1 for the first time. I think like I actually have seen quite a few people being like, oh, I'm gonna try world progression for the first time, and they've like literally never done week 1 before, and they've only cleared like 1 or 2 savage tiers before. A lot of people who start Shadowbringers, and it's like, I admire your motivation, but also that's gonna be really hard. So like just take small steps, like get into a hardcore group, clear week 1, then like use your week 1 experience to get into like a better week 1 group. Eventually, like through the people you meet doing that kind of thing, I think you'll be able to find your way into like a world progression group.
Yeah. I actually had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with Keo, who's the dude I've played with for the longest, about this exact topic, about what allowed us to get into a good situation where we were like what desired for teams. And essentially, like, there is, like you said, there's a lot of luck, right? Like you need to have the right opportunity open for you. But while luck is a factor, it's the fortune favors the prepared, right? You need to be in the best possible situation. It's like you have to have the most padded resume, and then when that dream spot opens up, you just got to shoot your shot. So that means things like having really good logs to begin with. Like if you have to be able to prove that before people know that you can do that. You need to do things like show really good consistency. The networking thing is super, super important. You essentially never want to have anyone say a bad word about how you perform in progression, right? So that when your name comes up, the only response is either neutral or positive. As soon as there's a bad word said, because it is literally all word of mouth about this, you're in trouble. And you're probably going to the bottom of the pile.
Yeah. I can think of a couple. But I still feel that. So in terms of the prep, let's say these are the things you need to do. In terms of the initial steps that you can do right now, then it'd be things like working on logs. How would you right now at the end of Shadow? So from Shadowbringers to Endwalker raid drop, there's 3 months, right? A little bit under 3 months. How would you actually tangibly go about doing those things as someone prospectively trying to get into? Let's just say hardcore prog then. Forget about world prog. Just getting into like a better. Let's say you're trying to go for. There's a lot of players who started playing this game in the past year. Ever since, I don't know why. I guess there's like the free trial thing that happened, and then
COVID.
people got bored. WoW had a huge thing, like COVID. And so there's a lot of players now who are coming from competitive backgrounds that want to do like hardcore prog. But now we have this lull, right? Like I think DRS was one place where you could have potentially gotten noticed, and like if you had joined either your group or the other group that was going, like AG2, meeting up with people there and stuff like that. But what are the opportunities right now?
So I think what Ari said about the stepping stones is super important. I don't think that if you've just started the game and you've never like hardcore progressed a tier, you should be saying, I'm going to world prog the first tier of Pandemonium. That's either unrealistic or you're insane and you will stand out on your own. Those are the kind of only opportunities right there.
Yeah, I'm insanely talented. We know this, of course. But
so what you should probably be doing right now is setting yourself up for something like a week 1. Because clear dates are actually something that's really, really useful as a recruiter to look at. So if you can see that someone cleared, the rate tier drops on a Tuesday. If you can see that someone cleared on a Thursday of week 1, you know that they've been through the blind prog experience and they've done this early, learning quickly, clearing quickly. If they're clearing on a Monday of week 1, you're like, okay. If they're clearing week 3, you kind of just don't consider that information. So looking for something like that, where maybe you're not going for like a world ranking team, but you're going to get, it's more that padding the resume, right? You're getting those clear dates to just add to the other things that you have, like logs and like references and things like that, to just create a more compelling case for why you should take the one really good spot that's going to open 6 months from now.
Yeah, when I recruit, I almost I think one of the first things I look at is clear dates. Like when people send me their logs, I immediately try to see clear dates. Although logs usually don't have it, so I just ask people what's your hardcore experience? When did you clear every tier? What are your clear dates for every tier you've done hardcore before, or just rated in general even. I think on the point of getting into hardcore, how do you so let's say you're new, maybe you start in 5.3, maybe you start 5.4, 5.5. That's a lot of players. And you clear through the current savage, sure, but now it has echo and now people kind of don't really care. It's how do you get yourself into a hardcore week 1 group? I think at the very least you should clear the ultimates, and then getting really good logs is probably the other big one. Other than those two, if you don't have experience, I think you just need to rapid fire as many applications to week 1 groups as possible, because there's actually quite a lot of week 1 groups now. There's a lot of people who want to clear week 1. So you just apply to every single one you can once you get those credentials of, the only ones you can do now are clearing ultimates, good logs, I think.
I also want to talk about the fact that I see a lot of people specifically come to me saying, how do I get into a week 1 group? But none of them say, how do I make a week 1 group? I think there needs to be way more just onus on them to say, I'm going to make a team to do what I want to do. Very, very, very few people actively actually do that. And if you want to guarantee your spot in a week 1 group, you may as well make it yourself, right? Then you have to go through the recruitment process, obviously. But if you care that much that you want to improve and you can't find a group, it's a perfectly viable option. Make a group.
Yeah, that's what I just after UCOB, my raid lead quit, so then they just made me the raid lead, and then I was just all right, we're just doing week 1 next tier. We've never done it before, but we're just gonna do it. So that's kind of what I did, and I just been doing week 1 since. So yeah, you can make a week 1 group. I would say 2 things there is that if you're doing that, don't try to make it alone, because that sounds recruiting 7 people sounds really awful. If you have a few friends or people you trust that are also interested in doing week 1, maybe they're experienced, maybe they're not, but if you trust their skill, you just form 3 or 4 people. You're the nucleus of the group, and then you can recruit the last few. I would expect that recruiting people is going to be a little hard as a group who has never done week 1 before. I think people who are applying for week 1, the players who are experienced with it are going to be why would I join a group of people who don't have experience, right? It's the flip side. And then you'll get people applying to you who also don't have experience. They're just like you, but now you're on the other side of the table and you get to be oh, that's risky. Even though you're the one applying, it'd be the same way.
So yeah, the problem is that you don't know exactly what you're looking for to recruit these people. And it's the exact same problem with why you can't just take anyone into an established group already. It's that you don't know what you don't know when you haven't done it. But what it will do, and the reason that I suggest this to a lot of people, is that even if you make a team that doesn't nearly live up to the expectations that you had of maybe you clear week 2, whatever, at least now you know what you need to improve on and what areas you lacked before, and you can actively work on those skills, or you can communicate what happened wrong to someone recruiting in the future. So if you say this is why the group went bad, this is where we failed, this is what I like deemed as problems and have actively worked on, that's a really, really, really good benchmark and a really good just like data set for someone who's looking at you as a potential raid member to just use and, you know, make more educated judgments off of.
Yeah, that's another thing I asked a lot of people who are applying for my group. I was like, you know, what's your prog experience? And also, like, how did you feel about that prog? And a lot of people gave me very non-answers, but every so often, like, you have someone that, like, can, like, speak more in detail about their experience. And I think if you see someone who can point out their mistakes and, like, figure out and, like, explain what they think they should have done instead, like, that's huge, because I think at, like, the really high level, a lot of improving is like you have to find the mistakes on your own. You don't have a tool like XIV analysis to tell you that you're messing up your rotation or whatever, especially when it comes to soft skills like solving and like coming up with strategies, making like specific hard decisions in progression. It's like you have to like after the fact, you have to like do a post-mortem and like analyze your decisions yourself and like determine what was right and what was wrong. So actually, like, in my experience, like I said, Sigma was my first week 1. And then, like, I did Sigma. I've been doing, like, week 1 since. But, like, I think, personally, I can say that, like, every single tier I did, I feel like I learn a lot by just thinking about, like, the different strategies I've come up with and, like, the speed we progress and, like, the different, the major problems we've had in progression and, like, new countermeasures for said problems the next time a new tier comes around. So I think, like, everyone who wants to do week 1, especially getting into World Prog, should be of that, somewhat of like the mindset of like being able to be self-critical and improve on that.
So your first week 1 group, you said was Sigma. How did you get into that group? What was the process for you as a person trying to get in? What was the process for them trying to get someone in? What made you a good applicant?
So I took over my raid league quit in UCOB after we cleared, and then it was my group after that, and then I said we are doing week 1. That was it.
Like after progging UCOB together, so UCOB for you progged it like what people would probably call like semi-hardcore, right?
Yes.
So after that experience, do you feel like your group is already ready then for week 1? Like you kind of make that judgment based on that frenetic sense of what's going on, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the time I was like, yeah, this won't be too bad. And then as we kind of alluded to earlier, we did the first time and I was like, holy shit, this is like way harder than I thought it would be. We cleared Saturday, I remember correctly. And, like, we didn't even do all the hours we planned to do. There was like, I learned so much that first tier. I mean, obviously, right? It's like before you start, there's a lot of unknowns. Like, there's just so many things you don't even know that this is like a skill that you should have until you experience it. And then like you learn about those skills and then you learn how to improve them. So I thought my group would be ready. I mean, we did clear week 1. So I guess we were ready to do week 1. We definitely did way worse than I thought we would do. Just because I totally underestimated what week 1 would be. Yeah.
I think you'll need to remember that. Like, it's going to be worse than you think it's going to be if you have no idea what you're stepping into. Like, I think because even resources and strategy aside, the gearing, man, is so different. Like, I think if people who can temper their expectations and change their expectations very quickly as they're going through this have a much easier time adapting to like new levels of progression. But if you can't change those expectations, that's when like a lot of frustration will set in, and that frustration will carry over day after day after day. It's like, why we're not here yet? You're not here yet, so adapt.
The gearing thing you're talking about is a result of that expectations thing, right? Where typically if a group is semi-hardcore or more casually progressing a tier, they're clearing like week 3, week 4, at which point you can have tome weapons, which is just a completely different experience on the final floor. So that sort of like subtle change there is something that you don't know until you actively go out of your way to do it. Now there's a couple other reasons that it's different, not just necessarily the gearing. There's also the fact that you're using progression strats. And progression strats are some of the worst things in the world. And it's a shame that so many of them somehow find their way into the party finder and become the norm. But please do not continue to do this. Prog
It's gonna
strats
keep happening.
are fucking awful. 99% of the time, you should discard everything on the Tuesday reset and just start again. Now you've got more information. You're not under the time crunch. Let's start again, do something that actually functions, and then we'll prog the tier again. I think that would be a much better idea than taking things like specific strategies that I've seen into the party finder and then solidifying them there for the next 7 months. Yeah.
I mean, we know how information gets proliferated, and people, like you already mentioned, that strat making is hard enough on its own. Now, and when you understand that as an individual, I think every individual understands that once they start doing it, and then you start doing it, and then you're like, do I trust some random stranger off of, fucking like Reddit or some shit, or like just some rando who made a new strat with toolbox? Like, is this actually gonna work? Is this actually good? I don't know. I don't think that's cute and all to say, man. Let's put it that way.
So the thing about prog strats is that, like, I think people just copy them because it's the first thing they see, because like the fastest groups are doing them. But I think what they don't realize is like those groups are able to do some like really crappy strats because they're very consistent players who like know how to, I don't know, like learn strategies very fast. And like even if the strategy has is like unoptimal and like uptime, or it's like a lot easier to wipe if you mess up with that specific strategy, those players are more consistent and they'll push more damage in other parts of the fight than your group probably will. And then you guys will suffer a lot more for it.
Yeah.
Exactly that.
Should we get to the trialing part? So we talked about it from perspective of what do you do as a recruit. So let's say you did take Sfia's advice and decide to go make your week 1 group, but you're clueless because all you do is hang out in his chat and he doesn't actually show you how to play the game or do anything.
Sure.
How do you actually go ahead now and make your group? What are the first steps I take here?
Post on Reddit. I actually, what do you mean? Like when you have like a core of 4 or 5 people and like you're trying to recruit the last, like how many do you already have a core or not? Because if you're like alone, you need to find 7 other people. Man, I don't even know where you would start with that. I feel like it's almost like a bare minimum to have a group of like 3-4 people because like let's say you are the only person in your group and you're trying to trial people. Well, anytime you're trying one person, you need to have 6 other people subbing into your group or something to allow you to be able to trial, right? At the very least, and there's like many reasons to have a core, at the very least, trialing is like a lot easier when you have like, you only need to have 1 or 2 subs for your trial dates.
What if you trialed everyone at the same time?
That I feel like it's like way too variable where it's like you don't know if it was like this person's fault or the other person's fault, or like I definitely try not to trial more than 1 person at a time.
It sounds like a disaster. Yeah. But yeah, it's essentially I think getting a core together, and I don't think there's I've never encountered any single person who's like, I want to do week 1 progression. I don't have a team, but I don't know literally anyone else, right? You always know someone. Even if you're just party findering everything, and up until this point, you would have met people in the party finder, and you can just reach out to those people. Get people with the same goals, the same ideas, even if they... Why are you looking like that? I have
no friends, man. Okay, what are you saying?
That is entirely your fault. You'll have some people, right? And even if some of them aren't to the standards that you want, you can ask them to come join for trials and things like that, and then you may decide later on that they are good or are not good enough, right? Having a core to then trial with is infinitely better. Now, you can do things like just grab 6 people who you see all looking for group as well, and then try and make it work, and then as long as you're super cutthroat and open about it, the fact that you're going to be cutthroat, that can happen. But typically, every time that I've seen a team actively recruit and be functional, it's been with an established group of people already who are essentially just trying to fill the gaps in what they have in their team.
So the first step, basically, that you guys are both saying is make friends. Okay. So
network. Yes.
Well,
it's the most important
thing. The initial step, like having just people that you vibe with and do stuff with, and after that, okay. Well, I guess the next step I would look at is, let's say you're filling in for these last 2 people, let's say. And beyond looking, the first thing I would probably do is look at a log, right? That's pretty reasonable to look at their page and just look at stuff. let's say you go in depth in logs. What are you actually looking for in depth when you actually? Because there's a lot, right? Like I want to say a bunch of things, but what are you guys thinking? Or what are you thinking about? I kind of know what Sfia's thinking about.
I usually punt that off to other people in my group to look at because I don't. But I mean, like I said, I look at kill time especially. Sorry, like not speed kill time, but sorry, there's a really loud motorcycle outside my house.
Okay, we can't hear it.
Okay, great. Like when you killed, I look at if you have a log for like week 1, I look at your damage for that log specifically, and just like hope that you didn't die or get any damage down in the clear, just like so I can get a better picture of how you play in like in week 1 prog. I guess it also depends what role you're trying to it depends what role you're trying to recruit, right? Because like analyzing a hero log is very different from analyzing a DPS log. I think like assuming someone is like already orange, pink, like I don't really look too hard into like number of uses of a thing or like specific I don't know, like buff alignment and stuff like that, because like I just expect that they're probably doing it already. I do on the topic though of oranges and pinks, like I definitely look at when they got those oranges. There are definitely people who will clear week 1, get the weapon, and go back in week 1 and then just get a really high parse because they're the only person in the world who has the weapon for that job. And it's like the dumbest thing ever. It's so stupid. So like I
historicals, dude.
I've definitely done that before.
Yeah.
But
I definitely like you got to take in the context when you're looking at these numbers.
I mean, I guess like for me, mitigation. I don't take mitigation for granted. Especially if you're looking at someone who's cleared week 3, 4, 5. Your mitigation can be really, really sloppy, and a lot of it just gets overhealed because healers can be way more sloppy and not deal damage because the DPS checks are more lenient because everyone's better geared. But that doesn't mean that like you can still have your like. I guess I'm thinking, well, this tier was harder because this tier Feint had such limited usage, for example. But like the general myths of like Feint, Addle, where are you putting? Are you using those? Because there's no fight where you should never be using them. Your attack, your samba, your reps. I like gunbreakers a lot. Gunbreakers for some reason don't like using camo. I don't know what that's all about. But I find camo usage has been really poorly done. Like missing a ton of stuff and like I don't know. I don't know. But like I guess mitigation I don't take for granted. That's the first thing I've been looking at in terms of analyzing is someone a good player or someone a weak player.
For me, a lot of the time I see that. I guess like the truth is we also don't really even look at people's logs beyond the like you see the number on the logs, and then like we only look more in depth at logs for like people that are we think are more likely candidates that we'll take, right? You get so many people that are trying to apply to your group that you sometimes it's just like someone's like, oh yeah, like my fastest clear is like Saturday week 1, and then you're just like, okay, well, like by the time I like seriously consider you, we probably found someone else. I think like for the few people that like we get to the step where we like really look at their play, that's also I typically like when we trial people, that's like one of the things I think about. It's like, are they using Addle, Feint, whatever? And are they like asking the group like, oh, when do you want me to use this? Like, are they communicative about those types of things too? So you can get through logs. I prefer to like see those things through just like actually playing with them. But yeah.
On the topic of logs and just looking at their initial damage, how much they can do. I think it's if we were to be trialing a person right now in my group and we didn't know them to begin with, the first thing you look at is that they have the ability to do damage, right? Because if this is a complete unknown, like the first thing you look at is if they aren't at least getting like 95 plus in every fight. Now, obviously there are people like myself who just hide logs, and so I've got like 3 logs up or something for this tier. Unless they're able to provide you with context of them able to do damage, you just don't even look, right? Because that is the basics of the basics. You have to be able to do damage. Now, it could be that they have like blues, but the reason that they have blues is because they cleared it week 7 and nothing but 510 crafted, in which case you're like, okay, that's fine. But you need to contextualize their ability to do damage. And so, like you were saying before, if someone goes in week 1 with the weapon and gets a rank 1 and blows everyone else out the water by like 10%, then you need that's the context that you need to get from looking at these logs. right? Because that literally,
analysis. Like I don't think that I feel like it's easy enough to actually look at the analysis and see what they're doing rotationally, and actually without trialing get a good sense. Like you can get context from the analysis. I feel like.
oh yeah, absolutely. But I'm talking like first glance, right? Where you open their FF logs because someone submitted their name to you, they've linked their logs, you press the button, and it comes up and it's like all grey with a couple green, and you're like, actually, but then whereas if you were to go to someone else and it's like a week one, all rank ones, then you go and contextualize that, right? But if someone's all blue, purples, and you're like, I don't really understand, that's where you need that context, because if they're not consistently pushing good numbers, because I feel like it's easy enough to do in this game, especially given time, then you're probably not going to be getting a second look. So yeah, there's contextualizing those numbers to begin with, which is super, super important. And you were talking about mitigations and things like that and utility usages. That is one of the most important things to look for. As soon as you approach the game in a way which is far more accountable, though you start to see people who are far more like ready to use the utility. So I've talked about this before, but I think that one of the most important sort of mindsets you can have after any mistake or any wipe or any death in the group whatsoever is, what could I possibly have done to mitigate the situation? If you die because a tank busted you by running on top of you, your response should be, what could I possibly have done to stop the situation? And as soon as you start thinking that way, that's when you find the people who, or like, you will instinctively start doing things like using Addle more appropriately. You'll be starting to do things like using Bloodbath Second Wind more often. All those sorts of things. Like these little things that which really, really add up, especially in blind progression when things are not clean, where things like that will keep you alive.
Here's a suggestion.
Okay.
You're trying someone and you have Sindolf and you guys are repping a DPS player. You get him to actually just run the tank buster at the person and see what they do during the trial.
Do it. I don't care as long as it's not on me. But
I mean, like that's not. Is that even just like a full? Like okay, so this is another. We're talking about. Okay, so this is jumping forward. And we're talking about the trial setting. We should probably look back and recap this. But what if you did a savage fight, but the whole time you had 7 people trying to sabotage one person, which is the person you're trialing? That'd be so much fun.
I feel like it's too easy to just wipe the run. It's way too easy to just wipe it. With the design of Savage Fights, it's just like you just intentionally just throw and there's nothing they can do about it, right?
Just walk on their tile.
Yeah. Will be things like spread and stack mechanics. You know, you like run at someone with a spread mech. You know, or like it's a lot of run. I guess every mech I'm thinking of is you literally run at them and see what they do. That would test your thing.
Yeah, for sure. I just in terms of the actual usage of utility, I think that people who use the utility a lot are like that's a sign for me that these people are thinking about the game in a way that I think about the game, or they think about it, what I deem to be correctly. It shows that they're thinking about more than just pushing their damage buttons, that they're thinking about the group and how everything functions within that, and what their role is within that too. You press utility buttons because not enough people do. I can give you a good example, right? In our T phase 1, we had our summoner use 2 Titan Eggy shields. I had to use Mana Ward. Our ninja used Shade Shift. Our bard got an X-Cog and an Adlo, right? All of this stuff was used up until we cleared. So if people aren't actively thinking about using these things, how are you ever going to make a strat around using this shit?
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on. You wanted to go back to like a recap on this, or you wanted to move into the actual trialing process?
I want to talk about. I think I really want to talk about the trialing. We started at trialing, but I think one of the concepts I really want to talk about is discomfort. And I think there's at least 3. More than just, I think there's at least 2 things I want to think about right away. You want to create stress and you want to create discomfort and see how people perform under these two really, really, really major mental challenges and also conceptual challenges, right? So beyond like a phase thing, and let me put one more thing. There's a paradox that's come up. The ideal thing is you put someone in a complete blind scenario and see how they perform in that blind scenario. But as you guys have both mentioned, the best candidates have done everything, have a great rating history, have week 1 clears. So then it's really, really hard to find this blind scenario, right? It's really hard then to create, and the reason you want to make this blind scenario is create discomfort and create stress. how then are you able to do this? Like, how would you do this now, knowing that we've tried phase a couple times and we see the problems with Helma? I mean, there's benefits. How then are you actually aiming to now create discomfort and create stress in a trial environment?
So just by nature of it being a trial, I feel like there is a layer of pressure and stress there. Now, it is absolutely not, similar to an actual, in competition environment where you're racing and you're trying to kill shit as fast as possible. But just by the sheer fact that they know that they are being analyzed, that they're being watched, that adds a little bit of pressure in my eyes. Some people respond to that very differently, and the way that they may respond to that may be very different to the way that they respond to the pressure of day one progression. But that's one very small thing.
I feel like, yeah, I think a lot of the pressure or whatever. I mostly just ask people for prog mods and I watch those because then it's like, well, there's the week one pressure and like, I mean, not everyone has them, but if you do have them, they're very, very useful to look at. In addition, like the reference, like those people will tell you like how did this person perform under pressure or in like if like there was a tense environment and like you got really toxic, like that will stand out. That person will say it, and we will probably not take you in the group if we hear that, like stuff like that.
But you're looking at prog bots. What do you go? Where's your eye focus on? When you first click on it, like do you like judge people based on like their UI and stuff? I know Sfia makes judgments based on UI.
Absolutely,
this guy is so judgmental, insanely judgmental. What do you focus on? Yeah.
I like to see like communication and mentality is a really big one for me. Like I guess like there's a toxicity point that I talked about, but it's like when things are going wrong, which is like almost every poll in prog, like are they talking to their team about like the recovery and communicating the important things they need to communicate? So as a caster, are you communicating your reses or communicating the fact that you don't have the mana to res? Same thing as a healer, or like the healers talking to each other. Like, are you saying like, okay, I'm covering the group, so like you have to res right now. Like I don't have Swift, stuff like that. I'm seeing like how fast they can learn mechanics. So if they see a new thing, like will they mess up that strategy? Like then on the first, second, third poll that they try it. In the long term, you look at consistency. I mean, you kind of look at like it's almost like everything, like because it's quite literally the skills you're looking for your team because it's the same exact situation.
Now, the problem with it is that, as you said, not everyone has it. In fact, very, very few people have week one footage of themselves. I think that's a massive travesty because everyone should be actually using footage all the time to evaluate their own play because it is like the most unbiased opinion you can ever get. But within the footage itself, yes, you're looking at all those things as well. But I think one of the things that is kind of glossed over a lot, and you touched on it a bit there, Ori, is your ability to communicate. So a good example of something that I've done for a trial before, which I think was one of the most successful ones I've done, was you bring someone into a group. So you've got 7 out of 8, you're trialing for the last spot. You bring them into a group, you make them create a strategy for a fight that they weren't aware of in advance, and then they have to communicate that strategy to everyone. Right? So you're testing a whole bunch of things at once, you're putting them under time pressure, and you're making sure that they can then accurately communicate what they've come up with to you. All of this is super, super important in progression, right? Because it's not just about being able to make a strat. You've got to be able to make everyone else understand the strat too. It's not just about making a strat. It's making a strat under the pressure and the time constraints that you have. So all of these things are super applicable, right? It's when you want to trial someone or you want to practice or you want to simulate, it's all about making the environment as similar as possible to what they're actually going to be tested in. So finding sort of clever and unique ways to do that is the big challenge here. It's also the big challenge for like literally improving at the game as well, but then trialing for it is just another extension of that.
Like it's really hard though, right? I don't know. I just like I guess like for me trialing is easy because I haven't done shit in this game, right? Like it'd be easy to trial someone like I'm still trying to puzzle through how you trial like the vets.
Typically when someone is like a known entity, it ends up the trial is more of a formality. It's more of a, does this person fit into the team? Like we most recently got MT in here, into our group, and it was never a trial. It was, we know this guy's really good. We'll bring him along, and he's functionally in the team, unless like he just doesn't mesh with us for some reason. But you know, that's so rare that happens. At this point, there isn't any situation, I think, where my team would just be like, we're gonna, because there are really, really good players out there, right? Like Final Fantasy top end has like Final Fantasy has like incredible players at the top end. And so once you know how good these players are, you can sort of just pick and choose between them. And most people who are good at the top end are also really, really flexible and dynamic in what they can play. So finding a spot for someone in a top end team isn't actually that difficult because the pool is so concentrated. Now, there are areas, particularly tanks, where there are less people, I think. Have you found the same, Ori, that finding tanks for week 1 is really fucking hard?
See, the hardest role to find is the one you need. That's all I know. That's how I felt every single time we were recruiting. Like we were recruiting a healer for quite a while, because our healer was going to Japan after Verse, and that was hard. But then he came back, so it was okay. But like yeah, I haven't really recruited many tanks, so I have not. It's hard to say for me.
Okay.
I've heard similar things for week 1. Like that, a lot of the week 1, like a lot of players I know aren't hardcore progging. They just look to clear week 1 and then play the game. I don't know if you call it hardcore prog or not. But like yeah, a lot of times there's like tank openings. Like yo, we're trying to tank this. Like you want to learn how to play tank? I'm like, no, I want to play Reaper.
Yeah,
play Reaper week 1. A huge.
It could be a nobody wants to play tanks in week 1. It could be a tanks that have been around for a long time have been babied by the fact that they're playing tank. So when you're looking for people of the top skill level, it's kind of true, but kind of not. Then playing tank is going to be tougher for that. So yeah, that's just historically I've found finding tanks for recruitment really, really difficult.
Okay. Can we hop into the questions for a little bit? Because I realize there's quite a few building up right now.
Sure, you got the sheet. Let's do it.
Okay. The first one is, I love you, Sfia, marry me. That's not a question. The second one says, how hard do you think it is to get back into World Prog for someone who did back in Gordius? Basically, I think the question that rephrases, if you, let's say you've been away from the game for about a year and a half, but you did or like 2-3 years, but you did World Prog back in like the Alex raids, and maybe you did at the start of Stormblood. Do you think that the dynamic of World Progging has changed a lot? The skill sets, the sort of knowledge base?
Since Gordius, yes.
Maybe a bit. This guy asked Gordius, what about like, let's say you stopped playing at the start of Stormblood, rather. You did like one Stormblood raid.
I would say that a lot of the skills are still transferable and relevant now. Gordius, like anything pre-creator, so Midas, Gordius, and then behind, is a completely different game, right? In the week 1 scene. Well, like week 5 or whatever the hell it was for Gordius. But anything that is creator onwards is probably still kind of relevant. Obviously, the game's changed a lot as well and developed since, and a lot of the player base I think has improved as well. But if they were able to be at the top end at one point, they probably have the ability to get back there. So it's all going to be case by case. But the question was, like, do you think that they have the ability to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that at any point, the good will always rise, right? You know, that's just how it works. But they have to actively want to do that. And I think they probably need to want to do it more than they would have in the past because the player base has improved so much.
Yeah, I think like 95% of like being good is like having the right mentality for it. So I think this is why you see like people who are good at like one game typically are like good at a lot of games because they like approach games differently from a lot of people. So I think like if you've shown that you're able to be really good at the game, then like you can definitely do it again. Of course, like yeah, like there's a question if you want it. There's a question of like maybe you like have an ego because you used to be good and you're not unable to accept the fact that like everyone else caught up. Like there's lots of context. Like it's hard to say, but it's you definitely like when I see that I'm like okay, there's like potential, right?
Okay. There's some WoW related questions. Neither of you guys have done WoW, or have you? You haven't played a lot of WoW. Never mind.
I played in BFA a little, like very little.
I want to
And
do a slight alteration to this question, which is, let's say you aren't good at strategy making. Okay, let's say you have 8 people who are all good at execution, good at damage, nice people, don't tilt, learn relatively quickly. What's the earliest you could aim for a clear without making any original strategy?
like 2 hours after the first team on stream kills.
Very fast. Like
So-
some of the, I know that like some of the really early clearing week one teams or like world prog teams, I don't know what you would call them, like some of the fast ones, like copy most of my group strats. I know a lot of groups do that. So
My understanding was that Silink, who won in verse, copied a whole bunch of your strats, and they were really far behind. But because of misplays by people above them, they just overtook because they do damn.
I heard that too.
Yeah.
But you guys are like the only. Who else has even streaming the world prog, right? It's like literally just you guys, right? Because I mean, TBS obviously just not, and we've like lamented on this many times. The JP teams definitely don't stream shit.
I think it depends on like where is your cutoff for world prog. Like tons of hardcore like week one group stream, like a ton of them do. But it's like, is it like based on placement? Like, is it based on mentality or whatever? Like world second in Promise, they streamed on like that Japanese site. I don't remember where. I think world 3 also streamed. I don't actually remember that.
Oh yeah, that JP team that was streaming on Bilibili, that was not supposed to be a public stream. That was one they were using privately to just have footage, and then people found it and then spread it. So yeah, that was, that was not supposed to happen the way it did.
Oh, I know. The world like 8th team was also streaming. Like that was like the primal team. I'm like pretty sure they were streaming. I'm actually not 100% on that, but like I think they were. So a lot of teams do stream.
Like when I think about this, though, it gets me wondering how much of an advantage it is to like have really good strat makers, or just like, okay, here's an alternative week 1 strat. Okay, everyone sleeps in an extra 2 hours. We start our prog the moment after the first fight has been finished, and then we go like as a world prog team, right? And then we copy strats all the way through until the final fight, at which we're trying to leapfrog. Wouldn't you be saving a lot of time and like mental energy and stuff like that?
Yes and no. My group's actually had this conversation about waking up late, doing primals first, and then just smoking the entire tier. But by using strats that you've already been established, and you just have people watching footage and getting guides and writing things up for you, so you don't have to, think about anything until the final fight. You're immediately throwing the early fights, which, in the big scheme of things, are irrelevant. But you're also removing that experience from yourself, which is kind of why most of us do it, right? Of course, being competitive is fun, but the blind prog experience is something you only ever get to do once. Like you can't do something for the first time ever again. So that would cheapen that for sure.
Sorry,
I thought about that too.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Were you gonna keep going?
No.
Yeah. So, in terms of how that would affect the race as a whole, I think it would end up being about net neutral because one, you're sacrificing time in which you could be ahead, right? If you're going to win the race anyway, wouldn't you just be setting yourself behind from the beginning? But if you were not so sure about that, and like you were thinking we're probably, maybe podium at best, maybe top 10, then there's probably more benefit to it, right? And that you're giving yourselves that advantage. So it's going to be very case by case whether that's actually a benefit to you or not.
Yeah, I think it's like at the very least, to talk about the primal weapon is like if this tier has a very tight enrage for some reason, it's like that's going to help you more. If the tier is like you kind of get a clean pull and it just falls over, then it's not going to do as much for you. So you're like basically gambling at that point, and I think most people wouldn't want to do that. For my team, I thought about that too, and then the answer was always just like that doesn't sound fun, so we're not going to do that. So yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I guess, yeah. Like my mindset first thing is like like the idea of winning is yeah.
You don't get anything for winning in this game, so why would you
You
do
get
that?
a tweet.
I mean, you get a tweet, but like you're only doing it for the experience. Well, most of us are only doing it for the actual experience of blind progressing and competing. And I think a lot of people actually really enjoy the more pure aspects of what blind progress is in Final Fantasy, and doing that would really detract from that.
I really enjoyed blind progging T9 with you and Cute Dog, man. It was
Because that was blind for you as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, you were just laughing at me while a meteor hit my head. Like every time
Yeah,
you just said bonk in the chat, you type bonk, and I'm like, what's going on? And then I just die.
Yeah,
That's cool.
That's good. It's fantastic.
In terms of the early strategizing things, so you mentioned you like have 8 people. Can there be a point of too many cooks? Too many cooks in the kitchen?
Absolutely.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how do we solve that?
I talked about that a little bit before, where it's about you need everyone to be able to solve a problem at some point in time, right? You don't need all 8 people working on every strategy. You may need 2 people primarily working on a strategy and then people who can contribute to that, but you don't at any point in time want 8 people talking over each other, right? And learning the dynamics of that like sort of communication flow is super, super important, and why I think the way that a lot of teams function, which is do a tier, disband, or massive reformation, is really hurting them because they don't actually learn how to work with each other in a progression environment over periods of time. And it's actually something that I've found to be super beneficial in my team now. We've been together for like nearly 2 years. And so now we know all these, like the information flow and how each other works and all that sort of stuff. So it's really, really important. It's a matter of understanding what your role is, not only within the team, but within even each individual conversation that you're having. It's understanding where each individual's strength is. It's just a whole lot of self-awareness and awareness of the group as a whole. So like, I'm not going to be contributing to areas where I know that I'm bad. I'm not going to expect other people to contribute to areas where they know that they're bad.
Yeah, you need to know how to give the floor to someone else. I think I've never had this experience, but someone in my team, in one of their past teams, have had the experience of like too many cooks, and they said like also like one of the problems they found is like some people like are just really bullish on their own strat and like no one else's strat, and they really are insistent on everyone doing their strat, and like you cannot do that. You need to know when like someone else already came up with a strat. You might have a strat in mind too, but like at the end of the day, they're like effectively the same. If that other person's already like a lot of the way through like suggesting it, maybe you can just or explaining it, maybe you can just like give a suggestion here or there, right? If someone's already talking, I think like interrupting them is typically very bad, unless like you have noticed that they have a very important misunderstanding of like some aspect of the mechanic or something like that. Then you go like, maybe that doesn't work.
So another way that I can break this down a little further is kind of the way that I actually think about the action or the process of solving a mechanic, right? And it's broken down into 3 phases. The first one is the discovery phase, where you're learning all of the pieces of the mechanic, right? You're learning what is actually going on here. You're figuring out exact ranges. You're figuring out things like timings, right? And then the second part is the strategizing phase, where you're taking all that information that you've learned in the discovery phase and you're putting it into something workable, right? You're formulating. And then there's the execution phase after that. So now within those 3 phases, you have people who are like incredibly good at the strategy part, for example. And within my team, we've got a couple of people who are really, really good at taking information and making something that works. Whereas something that I think I'm better at is the discovery phase and figuring out exactly what those moving parts are and how they interact, so that then other people can take that information and put it into something and put the pieces together in that puzzle. So understanding your roles within those areas is super, super important. And then obviously on the third stage, the execution stage, that needs everybody to be good at it.
But there's a sort of temporality there, right? Where the discovery phase is happening. So like, let's say you identify this mechanic and then you say, okay, so what's happening here is that there's like a protean. I don't know. That's the only mechanic I know ever. And then the next person's like, okay, so you have this, you pass this on to the next person. You guys are both thinking, what are you doing now as this person is solving the next puzzle? Are you solving this with them? Or are you thinking, okay, what else can I look at to understand?
A good example is something like Wormhole, where you have to look at all the pieces that are interacting, right? You're thinking, we've got dashes at these timers, we've got puddles at these timers. So what my contribution was during Wormhole was figuring out initially how everything worked, and then figuring out the restrictions in which the strategy had to be built around, which is 5 and 6 soak first, 7 and 8 soak second, 1 and 2 soak third, because that was what the information gives you, right? That's what discovery is, that you got to figure out how you can take the interaction of the mechanics, and I can now give the people who are better at formulating a strategy the information. We can do this in a way that has 5 and 6 soak first, 7 and 8 soak second, 1 and 2 soak third. that gives them a way better starting point. And then you have someone like Ara come up with, oh, okay, we have 1 start here, 2 start here, 3, 4 here, and then we go from there, right? So it's all about that. And then, the pieces that will contribute after that are really small things like the crossover, the cardinal, and things like that. But the bigger picture stuff in terms of the actual piecing together of the puzzle is kind of other people's responsibility within the group. Not that I don't contribute, but I only contribute where I feel like it's super important.
What I'm hearing is that you're much more deductive than constructive. So like when you look at a fight, you're establishing the constraints that a mechanic is presenting before you, and you're really good at identifying constraints, right? The sort of baseline of what you cannot do, or the baseline of no matter what, we need to do these things first. And there's people who are better at the more constructive side, which is like based on these constraints, okay, how are the different ways? There's many, many different pathways now in which we can solve this problem. How should we go about that?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly like that.
In terms of recruitment, do you guys value role diversity? Let's say you're looking at a new candidate to specifically fill one role, let's say. What's a good role here? Let's say caster. How much are you guys valuing role diversity and their like this potential recruit's proficiency on multiple classes, multiple jobs, and multiple roles?
Definitely value multiple classes within a role. Multiple roles, it kind of depends on the existing group composition, and like it's never going to be at the forefront of my mind, but it's like, oh, maybe we're recruiting multiple people and like they can do multiple roles. Well, that makes it easier for us to recruit a better player on a specific role in the future. Like that's like a type of thing that might happen, but like I really don't think about multiple roles that much. It's just like a nice to have, but like if I'm like, we're 7 out of 8, we need a caster player, like we're recruiting this person that only plays caster, as long as they have like, they need to have an understanding of what all the rules do. Like it's really important to understand like how a healer plays or like how a tank plays. Like, maybe they're not like maybe they like have cleared on those roles like Savage later on in the tier, like for fun with their friends, and like maybe they don't feel comfortable doing week 1 hardcore prog on those, but they have like enough understanding of like these are the cooldowns available to them, like with these timers, and like this is how a healer has to play in terms of like being in healer range or something, right? Like if you play physical range, you have to know that like you can't run off to Narnia, like stuff like that. So you don't have to play multiple roles or you don't have to be able to like raid week 1 on multiple roles, but I think having knowledge of them is nice. Or honestly like required to be able to like use like mitigation tools and like come up with strategies, good strategies, because like sometimes strategy is like based around like oh, this like makes our caster move less, like this gives melee uptime, stuff like that. On the topic of jobs, I personally like heavily value being able to play multiple jobs within your role. So if I'm recruiting an Omnicaster, it's definitely like you have to be able to play both Red Mage and Summoner. And like honestly with Endwalker, like I definitely expect everyone in my group to be able to like learn all of the at least at like a base level, learn all the jobs in their role, and then be willing to put in extra time to focus on like 1 or 2 specific jobs, because we only have 4 weeks, to like focus on 1 or 2 specific jobs that we deem to be like, these are probably the ones we're going to take for prog based on like how the jobs are balanced right now. Not being able to flex between the jobs, especially when jobs can get rebalanced and like you don't know what's going to be good or not on the tier. I think like how to describe it, like there's no excuse for not being able to flex between jobs because you have so much time between tiers to learn the jobs.
Yeah. I'm of the opinion that a lot of people have this sort of misunderstanding and this misconception that because people say, oh, any job is viable, that they can take whatever they want into like a blind progression scenario, right? Sure, you can do that. But you can certainly give yourself advantages by playing what is good, what is strong. And I think that good players will pick the strongest roles, right? Like, it's just the way that it goes. Sure, I like Black Mage, but I played Black Mage this entire expansion and progression because it's been really, really strong. Now, if it wasn't really, really strong, I would be hating myself playing Red Mage a lot probably, but I'd still do it, right? Sometimes, yes, you can just play the thing that's fun. That's fine. But in week one, where the percentages actually matter, why would you not play the thing that gives you the best advantage? And we all kind of know the establishment of what the meta is now, right? Where you've got the one of each type of DPS and then one flex. And so when we're talking about roles, we've unfortunately got this really awkward situation where there's one dude who needs to know like 7 different jobs across 3 different roles, and it's just fucking awful and miserable for him. So MT's that guy for us right now, and he kind of needs to permanently know ninja, samurai, summoner, red mage, maybe. Like, it's just miserable. And so then getting all those raid ready as well, and then maybe there's a balance change that happens on patch day, and he's like, oh shit, all that preparation's for nothing, and it's just awful for that one guy in particular. And so recruiting for that one spot is just trash. But every other one, it's just like, okay, all you need to know is the things within your role, right? The fizz ranged are all kind of, they're easy enough to learn and execute to a progression level that it's not so much of a problem. The melee obviously is, like they're all similar enough to the point where there's enough transferable skill that you can be at that level. Tanks the same. Healers typically, there's only 3 of them right now, so they've had a smaller pool than everything except casters. But you want them to be able to play everything as well, just whatever's strongest at the time. Having that ability to not only play the thing that's strong, but identify the thing that's strong as well, is super important. And that identification comes from having a deep understanding of the job within its role. A good example being Astro and Creator, where it got a buff to the balance card, which was now a 20% damage up buff, right? And now if you knew where it stood before those changes and where it stood after those changes, like you'd have a much, much better understanding of like just how broken it was, how obscene this number is. But if you didn't play much of it, you probably wouldn't have been able to make that correlation of like, this is like fundamentally broken and it is a must include sort of thing.
Okay. But you guys are both Omni job players. Like you guys pretty much have played this game long enough that you pretty much know how to play everything, right?
I switched to like every job.
Well, not like. Well, I guess like one of the things I worry about is, like adaptive utility planning. I guess. Like so, when I started playing the game, I started on Dragoon, right? So in my mind, there was no utility in the entire game. Like I would press second wind and bloodbath, and then if I died, I died. Um, I didn't know that like samurai and ninja had like these things that could like help you survive. So from like especially from like a healer perspective, you'd really want to know first of all the personals, all the possible utility, all the possible movement things. Maybe the possibility we've talked before about rescue tech, right, in Prague, and the place of rescue in Prague before, if we want to put that in. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you think that certain roles then maybe certain roles need to know more? Like especially Astro, for example, needs to know pretty much every rotation to some degree.
I think not everyone needs to know everything.
Mhm.
I think for example, your healers need to know everyone's personals. Your tanks should probably, or maybe your healers as well, should know all the raid mit that exists, so that because they're in charge of all the incoming damage. And the DPS will typically be in charge of knowing all the DPS cooldowns, right? Like chain and all that sort of stuff, and how it's best to apply these things. So no, I think no, not everyone needs to know everything, but there needs to be everything covered within your team itself. But it's also, I don't think the game has enough depth to the point where it's impossible to learn everything. I think any one person can, know all functions of every job in the game. It shouldn't take too long, and I think by the time Savage comes out, most top-end players will be at that point. 4 weeks is a long-ass time to learn 17 jobs? 19 it'll be?
Yeah, it's not hard ask to know like all the mitigations that all the different tanks or DPS have, especially when DPS each have one thing, like one raid thing, and like maybe a personal thing, and like that's it. Like it's to the point where like I just level all my jobs, and by the time I'm done leveling, I definitely know everything.
Yeah.
And like you don't even need to level either. I don't know. It's just there's just really not a lot. So
Oryza, I know someone on the street the other day or something recognized you in real life and asked about your hair and wanted to touch it and things like that. But there's another question here. I'm gonna rephrase it to be a little bit softer. Are you planning on making any major stylistic changes to your hair in the next 6 months?
Wait, sorry, what? What did you say about
Do you plan to change your hairstyle, or do you like it like? Just give us the hair update.
Yeah, I'm gonna shave it all off and go bald before gonna have a buzz cut for Endwalker.
It's good. World progression is all about speed, right? And that's clearly more aerodynamic. So you'll be
Well,
zooming.
the information gets to your brain faster. I used to have like a
Yes.
ponytail. It's very insulating.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
A lot of the questions, I think we've covered a lot of them, and a lot of them are just really troll. Unfortunately, Twitch chat. I blame your. It's just your art. Remember, your chat used to be intelligent, and then all these people coming in now just asking stupid shit.
I'm pretty sure it's to do with the influx of WoW players, right?
Okay, I was blaming WoW players.
We'll
There was
WoW
one other
players.
concept I really want to ask about, which is I think one of the biggest things in any sort of prog setting, world prog, week one, late prog, new fight, whatever. Endurance. I think endurance, correct me if I'm wrong, but endurance is a pretty important thing, right? Yeah, no. How do you guys evaluate endurance other than just in a new player, in a recruit? How are you trying to evaluate endurance other than let's raid for 16 hours today? Because that's not quite realistic, right?
References. I mean, like,
Is the answer always references, man?
that's because they're the best tool you have. It's like that's actually just how it is. But I mean, like you said it, you can't test how someone can play after like playing for 15 hours. Like, how consistent are they in the 16th hour? Like, how do you simulate that? Like, I mean, I know some people did stuff like waking up at 3 a.m. to simulate how well do you play when you have to wake up at this like ungodly hour, because that's what we're gonna have to do for progression. Like, some people try like that. For me, it's like, for me, that's just one of the risks that I just recognize when you're taking a player who hasn't done week one before. And if they don't have references like they just never done before, it's just a risk that I'm like might be willing to take depending on how good I think the player is. And there's other stuff too. Like, for example, one of the players in my group like was a competitive fighting game player. So he just like does the long hours in fighting game tournaments, which like it's different, but it is probably like just as mentally exhausting, if not more. So it's like, okay, because he's done this competitively, I have like pretty good confidence that like he'll be fine on that front. But
yeah, you got to keep in mind as well that due to the nature of Final Fantasy combat and the way that fights are designed, when it comes to endurance and you're at hour 16, like your limiting factor is the dude with the lowest endurance meter. Because there's a lot of times where one dude making like a slight misstep is just a wipe. And that is entirely due to the nature of the game. So it's super, super important and virtually impossible to measure before actually being in there. It also means that if you're incredibly good at it, it doesn't mean anything, because all that really matters is when you've got to stop, when the first dude needs to stop. So yeah, very fun metric, very little interaction with it.
How do you combat it then? Like, I don't think it's realistic to suggest everyone takes uppers and rebumps every 15 minutes, right? Like, but it seems like it's really core, especially when you're talking about, because especially with Savage, right? So I think Savage is actually probably the most demanding in terms. Hardcore Savage World Prog is probably the most demanding in terms of physical constraints, right? Because you're literally trying to clear in the first waking hour set, right?
Yeah. The goal for a Savage tier should be, excuse me, should be first day, right? And then you have to make a judgment call. Is this going to day 2? It hasn't been a day 3 since Creator, I think. But, when you get to those late hours, it all comes down to just awareness, right? And understanding what you can and can't do. One of the really important things, which is kind of understated about endurance, is if you're ahead and you're consistently seeing new progression points, there's like this wave that you ride. But as soon as you start stagnating, like the mood, the energy levels just drop through the floor. And I don't really know if there's a good way to combat that other than like, again, self-awareness, right? Of being aware that, hey, we've kind of stagnated for a while. Make sure that we're focusing, energy levels up, things like that. But at the end of the day, it comes down to each individual to monitor that themselves. But to actively do something about that involves riding that wave and constantly seeing new progression points and being on that high the whole way through, which is really, really difficult to do. It involves you like being ahead to begin with.
Like the better you are.
So what you're saying is just clear before you get tired.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean,
well, the thing is, you can get tired, but if you are consistently seeing new progression points, that like adrenaline kind of overrides the tiredness, and then you just stay on that buzz.
Yeah, I super agree. I think like at the very beginning of this, I like was talking about morale and momentum, and that's like this is the type of thing that I meant. Like, so momentum in this case is just like what you're saying. When every time you see a new thing, like you're just energized to see the next thing. And the second you hit a wall, in my experience has been like in rage walls or like very difficult mechanics like actually it's mostly just in rage walls, to be honest. Like the second you hit that, like people start to get tired, they start making sloppy mistakes. It's like Sfia said, it's like mostly a personal thing, but like you can make calls to help people out. So like maybe take a 5-minute break, make sure everyone gets up from the computer, like splash water on your face or like get a drink, whatever you need to do. The morale thing I brought up earlier was also like because of this. Like I think that sometimes if you just keep enraging, people start to get frustrated, and then someone like lightens the mood, and then like that can help you keep going as well. Just like the environment. And then at some point you have to just say like, we're messing up a lot. Like sleep is extremely powerful. We should just sleep and kill this tomorrow, because I don't think we're going to kill it today, even if we stay up.
Things like moving responsibility off of the players themselves as well is super beneficial. Like in Promise, we had Cleese doing callouts for us. And when it's a person who's not actively in the raid pushing their buttons, those callouts are going to be super consistent. And with those super consistent callouts, you individually are going to miss far less. Like as, for example, like, I don't know, whoever's doing shot calls gets tired if they're in the raid themselves, both their play and their calls are going to get worse. Whereas if you're outside of the raid and all you're doing is shot calling, you've got so much less to focus on. So that was a big benefit for us there.
On that note, how would you recommend, I guess first, would you even recommend that someone starting a hardcore group recruit for a 9th man slot?
Yes.
And then if you're recruiting for 9th man, are you looking for different things there? Or I guess what can you omit? Maybe that. And what do you want more of?
So 9th man skills are kind of not what people expect. A lot of people look at the 9th man and they're like, oh, this dude is the one who just looks at all the footage and big brains, all the strategies and things like that. But it's a lot more organizational. It's things like timelining everything, every fight as you go through it, seeing like, oh, this first phase is 2 minutes, 30 seconds long. This means we can get 10 seconds of delay on our 2s. It's things like that, right? It's establishing all of the back end, because things like logs don't exist at this point for you to then function off of. It's things like, we'll be in the middle of E11 and we'll say, I don't know how that thing functioned in E12. Can you go into normal mode and test that out for us? So then they go into normal mode after we've been through, and they just interact with one mechanic over and over again for us and get footage, and they'll be the ones to compile footage and clips of things like that and put it in the channel so that we can look at it whenever we're good. He'll be the person making clips of people executing mechanics correctly, so that when other people look at it and don't understand something, they can look at that clip. Oh, this guy did it correctly. This is exactly the movement I should do. Let's replicate that. It's all about creating support systems so that everyone in the raid can function better, as opposed to being the one who's making all the decisions and making all of the like strategic moves for you.
Yeah, I think the normal mode is a really big one, especially because like you do normal mode, and by the time you get to like the third fight, you're like, I literally forgot everything from normal mode. This was like 5 hours ago or something. I don't know. So like having clips, especially because normal mechanics, a lot of the time they're just the same without or with like markers for what they are. So it's like, oh, this is the exact size of the AoE here, or like this is actually a different shape than you thought it was, or like this is how it works. So that helps a lot. Timelining was a really big one for us last year, because like I just had the timeline up on my second monitor. We didn't have someone to call, but we're actually thinking about that or looking into that for next year. But like it's just, as I'm doing Shadowkeeper, I'm just reading the spreadsheet on the side, so my calls are like they're accurate. We know what's coming next. Our knights also helped with the like the buff alignment, like you said as well. Like each of us phase one, they're like, okay, it's this specific enrage, and like the mechanics at this time, I think you guys should like do like these buff timings. And we actually had one person who was like specifically like a very good summoner player, and they're like, they just like told our summoner player like, just do this, like do this alignment or something. So there's a lot of it's almost like there's a lot of like stuff you have to do in progression that's just like anybody could do this stuff, like clipping and like writing a timeline. Like you just kind of, and it's like almost like a waste of time if you have to do it, because you can be focusing on other things, like talking about the strategy that you want to pull off, or like, so you just like let someone else do it, kind of. And of course, like, it's not, when I say anyone can do it, it's not like there's not skill behind it. It's like those players obviously need to be skilled enough to understand like what's good buff alignment. They need to be able to I don't know, there's other skills, like they need to be fast, like they need to know exactly what you need and get it to you in like an organized way that you can access it whenever you want.
Imagine watching someone move markers around in game, explaining a mechanic, and everyone's kind of like, what the fuck is going on? And then having a diagram of those marker movements being drawn up for you of a strategy. Right? That's the type of thing that people are really, really like undervaluing. And that's kind of the sort of thing that Cleese is doing for us, where we'll be like, I don't understand any of that mechanic. Cleese, can you draw it on a diagram? 2 minutes later, we've got the lovely little MS Paint of exactly what we need to do, of a mechanic that someone just talked about, right? Like, those sorts of skills are super, super valuable.
Neither of you guys are describing a ninth man. Both of you guys are describing like an entire video team, and like if you thought about it in terms of sports infrastructure, you guys are talking about like literally 20-person teams.
Yeah.
All right, we had multiple people last year, so
there's definitely value in us diversifying and adding more depth to our support team.
Here's a question for both of you. If you guys could pick one esports organization to pick you guys up, who would you pick right now?
McDonald's.
Esports organization. Wait, yeah, didn't KFC just release a gaming console? So like, they're kind of an esports organization, right?
Yeah. You really want to be sponsored by KFC? Really gonna have to eat KFC on stream while you raid?
Do you think I don't like KFC?
I think it'll be bad for your mental.
Really?
What about Complexity Gaming? I heard they're pretty.
I mean, that's different. It's kind of cool though. That whole scene is probably better suited for another topic, another day. But it's like, because of all this new attention brought into Final Fantasy, that's kind of start of a conversation that needs to start happening at some point for maybe some people. Whether or not it's a thing that actually sees eventuality is another matter. But I feel like with more eyes here means more visibility, means more watches, means more money, means potential investment by these sorts of groups and orgs.
Means potentially having a stream world prog as well.
It does, but this has nothing to do with static construction and talent evaluation.
Well, it does. What about the ninth man? We got here not randomly. We got here through flow of discussion, right?
Okay. Well, if we're talking about knights,
yeah,
the ability. Okay, what an organization would do for static construction and talent evaluation is give you resources to get more people, right? Like, imagine if you could pay 7 Cleeses to do Cleese's job, right? That would be insane. But obviously that isn't there. Now, the people that help us out are doing it out of nothing but their own goodwill. I mean, like, we pay our crafters guild, but everything else is just like, they're there because they want to be there.
Yo, dude. How much if you had like a team though of like, let's say you had like 10 people behind you, 10, like you say 10 Cleeses, how much time do you think that would cut off?
Really hard to say.
Because Max said almost like nothing. Like Max basically says like each additional resource you get is pretty marginal, right?
You get diminishing returns for sure. Yeah. But that said, like, I don't think there's ever any point where more support is a bad thing. The only way it could be a bad thing is if you interface those things incorrectly and you just have poor communication lines. So having more people, I think, would always be a gain as long as it was set up in a workable structure.
Yep.
we should look to wrap up soonish. But
think
there
so.
is one kind of big core question that this references thing has been the sort of underpinning theme throughout this whole hour and a half or so. This idea of references and how important references are. And it still seems like really like if I didn't know anyone, I would feel really lost about this whole references thing. And we've talked a little bit about it, but like beyond just signing up for a bunch of groups and doing this, like, are there any other reasonable ways to try to establish those references right now? Or like, because I've already asked this question basically, but
one of the best examples we got of playing with other people in a semi-competitive environment was the 48-man Savage. We got to a whole bunch of TPS guys pretty much sat in a voice call and did progression with 25 randoms. And a few of those people actually stood out, right? So those are now names that we know, and that if there are references required later, we can be like, oh, this person actually performed really well in this environment.
who did the solo encounter for you guys?
It was Perez, I want to say. No, it was Sano. It was Sano. Because, you just default to having a warrior do all that stuff whenever it's a solo encounter because of self-healing and all those reasons. But yeah, that was it. But in terms of references, that's a really good example. Essentially, it's getting into content with people whose opinions you value and people whose opinions matter to others as well, kind of. Now, obviously, that can be really difficult because I know that most of my team never does things like PF. Most hardcore teams, they just don't. They play within their team, and that's kind of it. But within week 1 teams, they play a lot. Speedkill teams, they play a lot. So making those sort of connections are pretty important too.
Okay, speedkill settings. What about content creation?
What about it?
Well, let's say you were a super unknown. Okay, nobody knows you. You don't have any references. All you've ever done is PF in silence. What about pushing for do you guys ever notice? Do you think people know when someone posts the rank 1 black mage log is or a rank 1 summoner log on a fight, act a real rank 1, and having a bunch of those things, can those act as pseudo references for ability for you? Because not only would it show in my mind, it would show you both the number, but it'll also show you how this person moves their camera, and camera movement for me is big, and it shows a lot of smoothness of play.
Is this related to the references?
Yeah, well, if you can't build references, right? Is that
okay? So you're saying if you can't build references, creating your own content as a reference.
right?
Yeah. So this goes back to what I think is one of the most important things that you can actually give someone that's recruiting you or you're trialing for, which is footage of yourself playing. But instead of just giving them raw footage and letting them take away from it what they will, you give them footage and you actually talk about it and analyze it yourself. I actually looked through my YouTube the other day, and there's my first ever application to Elysium, God, 5 years ago now, and it's me going over an A8S VOD, and I just explain everything I do, start to finish of the pull. I explain why I do which opener I do. I explain where I use certain globals. I explain that, I didn't do this opener correctly, well, this reopener correctly because I lost 1 GCD and Trick, which is, 50 potency, but whatever. And it's that from start to finish about why I'm doing what I'm doing, because that shows a few things. It shows, one, their competency, but more importantly, it shows their critical thinking skills, and it shows whether they or not they have the ability to actually improve, because identifying your own problems is super, super important. If someone comes to you with a VOD and they're like, yo, I played perfect, there is literally no value in that VOD. So if you are going to apply to someone, I think that is one of the most useful tools you can give them, which is analytical data, footage of your own play, and be as cutthroat as you can be about yourself. Obviously, don't give them a run where you die 15 times, but give them a run where you think you did well, but where there's improvement to be made.
Yeah. If someone when I ask people about their past prog experiences and they just go yeah, it was good, there's nothing wrong, that's that in my mind I'm just yeah, I don't know if this person has the right mentality, because no one ever plays perfect. Never done the VOD walkthrough thing, I will say, though. Haven't done a lot of too much recruitment recently.
I really like the VOD walkthrough thing. Because I think the biggest thing that we had talked about last week when we were entering this was this idea of self-awareness, right? And being able to show off self-awareness at a measured level, right? Not just you're obviously not self-aware if you're just shitting on yourself the whole time and like aimlessly without goals and pointing out very specific things that you can operationalize and improve. Um, I think that's maybe a tool that we should be leveraging more often.
Yeah, I don't think people are. I find it extremely rare for people to be like too critical of themselves. It's almost always the other way. But yeah,
Yeah, I'm too modest personally, but you know how it is.
Well, yes, that is absolutely one of your defining qualities. All right. Does that wrap up all the questions we had?
Yep.
It does? All right.
Yeah, there was like 5 questions that asked, how do you recruit for a 9th man? And like, what gamer juice do you use? Coffee, tea, energy drinks, things like that. But the answer is
water.
obviously Red Bull. Red Bull Yellow.
Only if they sponsor me.
True.
Shall
Right. Yep, that sounds good to me.
we?
No, you take it away.
If you guys, because we haven't done the formal shout out yet, this is in case somehow you guys don't know who this dude is. He streams pretty often. He took a month break for a while, but he's back. You know, there's a lot of rants on stream while he's PFing Ultimates. Oryza, thank you so much for coming on with us, especially because I can be very intimidating, right? I understand that because of my macho energy and the fact that we're strangers. I really do appreciate you, like, just taking this out. As always, Sfia, thanks for, you know, bearing with again. Do you have any shoutouts that you want to do, though, Oryza?
No.
Do you have a book coming out this weekend, or
Shout outs for people? I don't
well,
know.
like when do you stream next? Things like that, you know.
Oh, well, I was gonna stream tomorrow, but now there's maintenance, so probably not. But yeah, I actually don't stream as often as I used to. I have a lot more YouTube stuff, and I've been planning on focusing more on YouTube stuff. So, yeah. So my YouTube channel is also Oryza Mercury. Yeah, I have a really cool Evangelion parody video. You should watch that because I spent a ridiculous amount of time on that only for YouTube to be like, no, that's copyrighted. No one can see this. So, so please look at it. Thank you.
You also been doing a whole bunch of like TikTok and short condensed Twitter videos recently, right?
Yeah, so I've been doing like a Final Fantasy XIV 101 stuff, which is like basically TikTok or YouTube short videos that are like made to teach people the game. So it's like really simple stuff. So it's like, this is a stack marker. So I have a video on a stack marker. I have like a video on like, this is a proximity marker, or like the one I literally was working on like for the past few hours before we did this was on like the global cooldown. So it's just like basic stuff that I work on. So I got that. My YouTube has like a bunch of random stuff. There's like stream highlights, there's guides, there's the like longer guides, shorter guides, my clears, whatever. So you can I organize them all in the playlist, so you can just go look at that.
Before we totally wrap, Sfia, what's the odds that we can end this by watching that VOD review?
Dude, it's like 20 minutes long. We don't have time.
Well, we can end stream and watch that. I kind of want to check it out with you.
I don't remember it, dude. It could be really embarrassing.
Can we react to it? That's the meta now. We're all React streamers now, right?
Fuck. I mean, maybe I'll think about it. What if I just post it and then just run away? Is that fine?
You can watch it on your.
I don't want to watch this on stream. I'll be so fucking embarrassed.
We want to watch it on stream, dude. We want to watch. This is React. This is React content that we actually been waiting for. This is the podcast. No. React to React.
All right, I'll watch it. Whatever. Keep in mind, this is like 5 years old. It's going to be terrible. But in terms of wrapping up, Jung, who are you? Where can we find you? What do you do?
You can find me in Twitch chat, twitch.tv/Sfia. I'm usually in the chat. I like to comment the big poggies, and if you guys want to get my new emote, I have a new emote, guys. It's yeah, this is the only plug I want to do for myself, guys. I have a new emote. It's pretty great. If you're using 7TV, you can check out the double cock emote. It's double cast on crit. It's my build. It's nothing weird. It's about a build. All right, so check that out. And that's all I have to say.
That's okay. I'm gonna not enable that one.
Make sure you add that. I can enable it. I'm a mod on your channel.
Oh, fuck.
You can change that.
Yes. Anyway, that should wrap us up. Oh yeah, me. He said twitch.tv/Sfia. That's actually me. That's Jungroan. But yeah, so you can find me here. I'll be streaming again later tonight with the WoW guys raiding again, so that'll be fun to watch. We can go through that and Pepe laugh in solidarity. But apart from that, Twitter, Twitch, the usual. My YouTube's kind of barren, but this podcast itself will be uploaded to YouTube, to Spotify, and something else as well.
Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, just all the other stuff, you know.
Yeah. But I think that about wraps us up. So thanks, Ori, for coming online. This was a really good show. Hope you guys enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me.
And we're good. Peace.